So we have the formula for an ionic compound here. And the goal of this video is, what do we call this thing? It clearly involves some cobalt and some sulfur, but how would we name it? Well, the convention is the first element to be listed is going to be our cation. And if we look at cobalt over here, we see that it is a D block element. And D block elements are tricky because you don't know exactly how it will ionize. So we know that this is going to be our cation. It's going to be our positive ion, but we don't know what the charge on each of those cobalt is actually going to be. So now let's look at the anion. Let's look at the sulfur, or as an anion, the sulfide. So let me underline that. And on the periodic table, we see sulfur is out here, that it would, that in its group, it would want to gain 2 electrons in order to have a complete outer shell. It's just like oxygen. It wants to gain 2 electrons. So the sulfide anion will look like this. So it will have sulfur. When it ionizes, we'll have a 2- charge, just like oxygen, just like everything else in this group. It would want to gain 2 electrons so that its outer shell looks like that of a noble gas, looks like that of argon. So we can use this as a clue to figure out what must be the charge on the cobalts, because we have 3 of the sulfides. We have each of the sulfides has a 2- charge, and we have 3 of them, so that's going to give us a 6- charge all in. And then the cobalt, we have 2 of them. And so these 2 cobalt have to offset this 6- charge. They have to have a 6+ charge. Well, that means that each of them need to have a 3+ charge. If each of these have a 3+ charge, and you have 2 of them, then you're going to have 6+ on the positive side, and you're going to have 6- from the sulfides. And the reason why this is useful for us is now we can name this. We would call this ionic compound cobalt 3. Cobalt, and you would write it with Roman numerals here. Cobalt 3 sulfide. Cobalt 3 sulfide. Now I know what you might be thinking, hey, when we looked at other ionic compounds, I didn't have to write the charge of the cation there. And the reason why the convention is to do it here, and actually I don't have to write it in uppercase there, so let me rewrite it as cobalt 3 sulfide. The reason why I wrote that 3 in this case is because the cobalt can take on multiple charges. It's known as polyvalent. If something is in group 1, you know it tends to have a +1 charge. Group 2 tends to have +2 charge. If it's a halide, it tends to have -1 charge. But these metals here in this D block here, they can be ionized in multiple ways. And so that's why we had to figure out what the charge of the cobalt is, and we write it here in the name. We would call this cobalt 3 sulfide. You could have other ionizations of cobalt in other ionic compounds, but this one is cobalt 3 sulfide. And you could go either way. You could say, okay, if the cobalt has a charge of 3+, you could figure out its formula right over here, or as we just did in this video, you could go from the formula to the actual name.